On behalf of RCTV, I am Ken Simmons, and the guy standing beside me is
Henry Cooke.
Yes, you are.
I hope so.
I knew that. What's going to happen today, Henry?
Well, Ken, we're coming up towards Veterans Day.
Yep.
And in the observance of Veterans Day, we look back to Randolph history back in World War I. And the reason for Veterans Day, we're going to look at the people who served from Randolph and those who made the supreme sacrifice. We're going to visit places here in town where our heroes lived and see the places where they're remembered at, including this spot we're at right now.
Yeah.
Here in front of the Town Hall, Memorial Park. We have this beautiful Memorial Plaza where we have the dedication to those who served in World War I, those who made the supreme sacrifice, those who made the sacrifice in World War II, those who died from Korea, and last but not least, those who died in the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, I wonder how many people come down here to see this kind of holy place.
I don't know, but I think on Veterans Day, being on a weekend, or any other time when you're thinking of the people who served, who are serving far away even today, that it behooves us to come down, remember those who served, and especially those who made the supreme sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Not far from here is one of those special places that I want to take you to right now.
Oh man, I can't wait. Let's go.
Off we go.
All
Thank
right.
you, Ken.
Henry, where are we now?
Ken, we're in Crawford Square. We're at a place that you told me you were very familiar with.
Yes, I am.
And here we are in Crawford Square, right in front of the First Congregational Church.
Yeah.
And this is something I went by on a regular basis on my way to school many times.
Yeah. Let me say something here. This has been filled in, but this used to be the sidewalk here. And when I was a kid, my mother would take me to Brockton for shopping, and I couldn't wait to go. And we'd sit here and wait for the bus right in front of this monument. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. But everyone goes through Crawford Square on one time or another in the course of their travels. This is the memorial to John Douglas Crawford. He was the first man from Randolph to die in World War I. And now, well, you may ask, why here? Why this location, not somewhere else? Well, you remember when we were at the library an episode or two back, we saw John Douglas Crawford's portrait in the library.
Yes.
As a young boy.
Yes.
Well, he grew up right next door, just down the street, down to beyond the library where the War Memorial is today, where we go on Memorial Day and Veterans Day.
Oh yeah, of course.
So he grew up in this neighborhood. He hung out in this square, used to be called Central Square, up until the time they named it for him in 1919. And in 1919, they named the memorial for him. But when World War I broke out, he was one of Randolph's first residents to decide that he wanted to do something about the fight. And he joined the Army. He was a very successful young businessman. He worked for an international banking firm. He graduated from Yale. A very successful young man.
Was he wealthy?
And, well, the Turner family was one of the first families of Randolph. They were very wealthy. The Turners and the Crawfords were heavily involved in law and banking. Crawford was working for a banking firm that had offices in London and New York and Philadelphia.
Did they intermarry?
Yes, they did. That's how they all got together.
Okay.
And that's how John Douglas Crawford found out about the war. He was in London. And of course, the people in London and people in England already were heavily involved in the war, so he could see the toll that it was taking. He knew what a war was all about, yet he decided, I want to do something to help my countrymen, to help England, and to help freedom. And so he enlisted as a second lieutenant in Company H of the 28th Infantry Regiment in the 1st Division of the Army, and he served in France on the Western Front. And on May 27th, 1918, in the Cantigny salient, which is, it's about, if you drew a map of France and cut a diagonal line across, it's about midway, about a little above the middle of the country. And he was serving there with the 28th Infantry and was killed in action.
Just a few months before the armistice.
Just a few months before the armistice.
The armistice was November 11th, as you know.
Well, the Americans had only been in the country a few months, but he was one of our first. There were many Randolph residents who answered the call.
Okay.
And we're going to find out a little bit more about some of the others at some other locations around town that you can still visit today.
Are we going someplace from here?
We're going to go from here. We're going to go down to learn a bit more about Thomas Whitty Desmond. And Thomas Whitty Desmond and John Douglas Crawford are connected by time, by history, and by an interesting quirk of circumstance.
Oh man, let's go. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Let's go see it.
Well, we've just come from Crawford Square. Now, where are we, Henry?
Well, we're down on Pleasant Street, just past the entrance into the soccer field. And I want to show you, we can't go in today, but this beautiful old house across the street.
Yeah, I got to say something to this. It's a beautiful house. It doesn't look old.
Oh, but it's very old.
Is it?
This house dates back to about 1820.
Wow.
It's the last of the Cape-style houses that were built around 1820 before they started building the shoemaker houses with the shoe shop Elms.
Yeah, yeah.
And that I want to talk about on another time. But this house is significant for a number of reasons. In about 1848, it was the site of the first Catholic Mass in Randolph.
Is that right?
And
yes, that's interesting.
But it was owned by the Desmond family, and one of those members of the Desmond family...
Can I stop you there?
You certainly
can. The Desmond family, I know that name. The Desmond family were very prominent in Randolph.
That's right.
Weren't they, the Turners and the Crawfords, interlinked somehow?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is it Thomas W. Desmond Post? Is that?
Thomas W. Desmond Post, Thomas Whitty Desmond.
That's what the W stands for.
That's what the W stands for.
I wondered for that. For years I wanted to know what that
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Well, now you know. But his father's name was Jeremiah, and he was a Randolph selectman, and they lived in this house. Tom was born here in 1898 and lived here throughout his life. Attended Randolph schools, graduated from Stetson High School, class of 1912. And in 1918, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Very important, remember when we were at the memorial at Crawford Square, I told you that Thomas Whitty Desmond and John Douglas Crawford were connected by history and a strange twist of fate.
Yes.
Well, one reason we talk about Thomas Desmond today and in conjunction with Veterans Day is because he too was killed on the Western Front, sadly. He was one of 3 Randolph battle casualties during World War I. Ironically, they were both in the 28th Infantry Regiment. They both died on the same day, May 27th, 1918. Both died within about a mile of each other, within about an hour of each other. There was a German counterattack during the American advance, and both men were leading companies and both fell in action that same day.
That's fantastic.
Unfortunately, the Desmond family didn't learn of young Tom's fate until about almost 2 months later.
Wow.
You think of how news travels today with almost instantaneous information, and to think that the family had received word that something was amiss, but they didn't get confirmation of Thomas's death until September, almost 3 months later.
A World War I hero for sure.
Very much
Absolutely.
so. And as you note, the Thomas Whitty Desmond Post of the American Legion.
That's where I saw that. The American Legion, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But he is one of Randolph's heroes, and I want to take you to another location for another of Randolph's heroes.
Let's move on. Let's move on. That's fantastic. I love it. I just love it. I know where we are now, Henry. We're at the corner of Liberty Street and North, right?
That's right.
Okay. And you say there's a monument here, and by golly, there is.
Of course there is. Would I lie to you?
You know, I've lived here all my life. I've never, ever seen or heard of this monument. Why is that?
Because there are so many monuments in Randolph, Ken, that are dedicated to the people who gave their lives for America's freedom, that people who grew up here in town, lived here in town, and in the case of people like Thomas Mackinle, died for their country in service, and people want to remember them. And in this case, we have the Private Mackinle's Memorial here at the corner of Liberty and North. Now, Thomas Mackinle grew up on West Street, and his father owned a Rexall drugstore, on North Main Street. And you asked me earlier why I was carrying my copy of Beneath the Elms with me. And because if anyone has their copy and they take it out, they'll see there's on the cover of Beneath the Elms is Mackinle Drug.
Mackinle Drug. Look at that.
Tom Mackinle, unlike Thomas Desmond and John Crawford, was a victim of the Great Flu epidemic, which swept Randolph and, of course, swept all over the world, as we know, which is evidenced by his date of death. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, went out to Fort Drum, New York, and arrived there just about the time that the flu epidemic arrived. And unfortunately, he was struck down by the flu pandemic before he could ever get into the fight. Now, we know of other people. We know, for example, here in Randolph, they closed the school down for 3 weeks because of the flu epidemic. We know about 30 people in Randolph died from the flu during the months of September and October of 1918. So not only were we fighting a war against the German aggression on the Western Front, the war for liberty and democracy and all those things that the boys were going over for, and I will note the girls too.
Yes.
Because a little later on I'm going to tell you a little bit about that.
Okay.
But they also were fighting a war against disease.
But this gentleman here never went overseas.
Never went overseas.
We just came from Lieutenant Crawford, who died in France.
That's right.
And this man died of the flu pandemic in 1918.
That's right.
But nonetheless, remains a hero in the eyes, hearts of his fellow countrymen.
And as well evidenced by the fact that a memorial was dedicated to him.
Yes, absolutely.
And now I want to take you to another location dedicated to Randolph's other heroes.
Oh, I can't wait. Don't tell me, surprise me. Well, I know where we are. We're on North Main Street and Liberty.
That's right.
What are we going to see here?
Well, Ken, I know I've shown you a number of historic objects and historic artifacts, and this is probably the first and only time I'm ever going to show you historic concrete.
Concrete. All right, I think that's great.
Take a look out in the street here, just beyond us in the middle. You see that patch of concrete?
I do.
And countless Randolph motorists have been driving back and forth over this for at least 90 years now.
I'm one of them.
You're one of them?
Yeah.
I'm one of them.
That's the original concrete road.
That's the original concrete road.
And
we've been talking about the events of World War I in 1918. Now, most people take Route 28 for granted. During World War I, people started becoming more concerned about national defense and the roadway system and making sure that America was safe. One of the outcomes of that was that Randolph, North Main Street and South Main Street got paved for the first time ever. Before that, it was a dirt road, muddy in the spring and fall, dry and dusty in the summertime, frozen over in the winter. In 1918, they paved it with concrete, and it became known as the Concrete State Highway.
Wow, was that fairly new at the time, concrete?
That was very new, and it was because of that brand new technology device, the automobile. You remember, this is the time of horse and wagon. During World War I, they have horse and buggy drawing artillery, and the automobile at the end of the war starts to achieve some prominence. And during the Welcome Home Parade of 1919, a year after the armistice, this concrete highway became the centerpiece, the focal point of Randolph's Welcome Home celebration, where they had a parade that was begun with a parade of motor cars that circled the town primarily on this roadway.
Wow.
And then the big parade with horse-drawn floats, marching bands, and marching soldiers marched down this street from Crawford Square, Central Square, then renamed Crawford Square, all the way down this street, all the way down to West Corners in honor of Sergeant Mackinle, and then all the way back down to Maple Street, where they say the parade turned around on the concrete highway and then entered into the grounds of Stetson High School, where they played a ball game, they had a band concert, fireworks in the evening, and then a dance at Stetson Hall.
You know something, I gotta say to people sitting at home, do you know of any other man in this universe that could make a piece of concrete sound so exciting, so adventuresome, so romantic as Mr. Cooke just did. I thank you, Mr. Cooke. That was a beautiful story,
Well,
and I know it's true.
I just hope that when people are stuck here on this road at rush hour in traffic, that they just remember this is a very historic road.
Absolutely.
It probably won't help make them feel any better, but they learn a little bit in the process.
Absolutely. What's next, Henry?
We have to go on, and we're going to honor a couple more of Randolph's special heroes.
Oh, great. We've done a great job so far, I think. Oh, Henry, I'm having the time of my life. Where are we now?
We're on Old Street now, Ken, at the Charles Gabriel Devine Elementary School. And we've been here before, but before we were doing it as part of the tour of North Main Street. And I think the people need to know why the Charles Gabriel Devine School is named such, and why we're here in front of this stone with a star on it.
Yeah.
And of course we have the Charles Gabriel Devine School with its shields, and we've been talking about the men from Randolph in World War I who fell in action or died during the flu pandemic. And Charles Gabriel Devine is one of Randolph's native sons, like Thomas Mackinle, who unfortunately never got to the fight. He was a mechanic. He grew up towards the center of town, and his father was a town official.
You're talking about Charles Devine,
Gabriel Devine.
Right.
And the school was built in 1930, and when it's the same time that the Daniel Joseph McNeil Elementary School was built, also named for another Randolph soldier.
Did Mr. Devine fall in battle?
He died at the Great Lakes Training Station while he was training to be an aviation mechanic in the Navy.
Oh my goodness.
And here we do have the third of Randolph's battle casualties, Hugh Alexander MacDonald. He was North Randolph's battle casualty. He grew up where the St. Bernadette's Parish Hall is today.
Oh really?
Yep.
Yeah.
And his parents ran McDonald's store, a little variety store right at the corner of Pond and North Main Street. When the war broke out, like John Douglas Crawford, he immediately enlisted, this time in the Marine Corps, and he enlisted in the 4th Marine Battalion, who were in the thick of the fighting in the center of the Western Front. He was killed on July 19th in the Battle of Chateau Thierry, about 20 miles south of where Devine and Crawford fell. He fell about a month and a half later, but he was one of 2,000 Marine casualties during this battle. And
he fell on July 19th, 1918. Am I reading that right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's so close to the armistice. What a shame.
It really is. But this memorial was erected on Memorial Day in 1930 at the corner of Pond and North Main Street, right by his parents' store, so they could look out of their store and know that Randolph people cared.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's terrific. Why was it moved here? Do you know the story behind that?
Well, I think
Not
it's
that
because
necessary.
of road construction, the widening of North Main Street, the building of Provost Market, modernization of the neighborhood meant that the space needed to be used for something else.
Oh.
But again, because Randolph people cared, they cared enough to move the memorial down here to town property where it could be preserved forever.
Oh, that's great. That's just terrific. Another good story. Now we are going to, don't tell me, surprise me. And let's go.
Okay, we shall go.
Well, you don't need to tell me where we are now, Henry. I know.
No, you're back in familiar territory.
Back in familiar territory, the old Stetson Hall.
It seems that no matter where we start out here in Randolph, when you're talking about our history, you somehow or other end up gravitating back to Crawford Square,
Yeah.
back to Town Hall, back to Stetson Hall.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is important because Stetson Hall in our story today figures an important role.
Oh boy, does it ever.
Now, if you were here in 1919, you would have seen out on this side lawn, right out here, you would have seen the sign dedicated to the soldiers and nurses in the Army who were serving during World War I. And I understand that sign is a wooden sign with gold lettering and gold stars for the fellows who fell. That sign stood until it was blown down during the 1938 hurricane.
Really? I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
You were too young anyway.
Oh, no, I'm not too young. No.
one of the people that we haven't talked about yet today was Daniel Joseph McNeill, Randolph's last casualty of the war, and the person that they named the McNeill School after, the elementary school that's now the senior center.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Did he die in combat?
Unfortunately, we don't know how he died. We think he may have died in an aviation accident. There were about 5 men from Randolph who were involved in the new field of aviation. Remember, they'd only been flying for about a dozen years at this point.
It was brand new.
So these were people on cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
And they were, we think he was killed in an airplane accident about a week after the armistice was signed.
Oh, man.
But even though that was the case, we see him here. We have Hugh Alexander MacDonald, Thomas Mackinle, Daniel Joseph McNeill.
These people with the stars are the ones that fell.
They are the ones that fell. That's we have the Gold Star mothers.
And
the parents of the soldiers who fell.
Let me just point this out while we're right here looking at this. This is probably the only female on this.
She is Mary Long, was an Army nurse who served on a receiving ship in Boston Harbor. And there is one other woman.
There is another woman?
Yes, there is. Mary Frances Malley.
Uh-huh.
And Mary Malley was an Army nurse who served in France during the war. She went over at the same time that John Crawford and Tom Desmond and Charles Gabriel Devine all entered the service. And they all did their part to serve. And here we are in the foyer at Stetson Hall, where they remembered, again, on the day of the Welcome Home celebration, they dedicated this World War Memorial remembrance, and it shows a bronze plaque showing all of Randolph's people who served during the war. Familiar names like Doyle, Good,
these are all familiar names to me.
and others, and also at the very bottom, a small plaques indicating the different branches of service on land, on sea, and even in the air.
In those days, in those early days.
John Rooney, who served in the Aero Corps, as they called it at that point, the precursor to the Air Force.
And this over here, the last name, Martin E. Young. We have Martin E. Young School.
That's right. Yeah. And that's who the Martin Young School is named after. He was a state representative later in life. He was a town selectman. He was known as Mr. Democrat.
Yes, he was.
And
heroes all.
Heroes all.
Heroes all.
They all answered the call and did what they felt needed to be done to preserve freedom, democracy, and, as they said, civilization. Now, you remember I was telling you outside about the honor roll. Well, here's a picture of that honor roll as it appeared about 1930 out alongside Stetson Hall. And again, like the memorial inside of Stetson Hall, it had all the names of the individuals.
Is this World War I also?
This is all the soldiers for World War I.
Oh. Are we sure of that?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
This is the one that was blown down during the 1938 hurricane, so I've been told.
All right. Okay.
And then over here, next to that, we were talking, when we were looking at the concrete, we were talking about the Welcome Home celebration. They had a grand parade, and actually Stetson Hall is important because it was sort of where the reviewing stand was. It was the focal point, if you will. It's where the parade started. It's where the parade ended up. And here behind what is now the new town hall, then the Stetson High School, the veterans, the soldiers, the sailors, and somewhere in there are Mary Malley and Mary Long. They gathered to have one big picture taken after the parade, before the ball games, before the banquets, before the dance, and with the old Congregational Church in the background.
I was just going to ask you, is that the Congregational Church in the background?
Congregational Church.
Now this is Stetson High School.
This is the Stetson High School.
present town hall grounds.
Yep, this is essentially where the ball field is, the high school field.
Okay.
And they, with of course, in 1926, they built an addition onto the back of Stetson High School to further build out the school to give it more space.
You know, with the population of the town had to be low at that time. Look at all the people that were in the armed forces.
When you consider this many people and we had about between 9,000 and 10,000 people living in town at the time.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. It's a big percentage.
It's a very big percentage.
Yeah.
Well, I got one other thing I wanted to show you.
Okay.
Something we found during the renovations of Stetson Hall that pertains to our story today. Of course,
this is going to be a surprise to me.
well, it's going to be, I think, something a little bit different. One of the things we have that we got out of the Stetson School, which we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Again, remembering those who served at Stetson High School, and you may remember this, that these hung up, I understand, in the foyer. They were removed during when the Stetson High School was being renovated to serve as a new town hall. And this is the honor roll of the graduates and former pupils of Stetson High School who served in what was then known as the Great War or World War, because they had no way of knowing that World War II was going to happen.
Yeah, I've got to point out here that Ted Ludington, Theodore Ludington, who was one of the town's probably most colorful politicians,
I suspect you're right.
is on that honor roll. That's incredible, Henry. Thank you for showing me that.
And we can see that amongst the fallen was Malcolm McNeil, who I'm not sure if that was Daniel Joseph McNeil, but also
Here we have Thomas
Charles
Desmond
Devine
again.
and Tom Desmond.
Yeah.
Tom Desmond, class of 1912.
Yeah.
Charles Devine, class of 1913.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad you showed me that.
And then beside it was the roll of honor of the graduates of Stetson High, who also, they had two of these. And this was given by the Stetson High class of 1919, right after the war.
Oh yeah, 1917, 1919. In the Great War.
In the Great War.
Isn't that something, huh? Jeepers, how things have changed, and yet they don't change at all.
That's right. But the people were, determined. They had in the Welcome Home celebration, which I've been talking about throughout our visit today. They described it in the newspapers as the biggest celebration since they welcomed home the troops from the Civil War.
Oh my goodness.
And perhaps one of the three biggest parades they ever had in Randolph. One of them being the Centennial Parade, another one of them being one of the town anniversary parades, perhaps the 175th Parade in 1968, and perhaps the third one being the Bicentennial Parade just a few years ago. But when we were working upstairs, we found a box with a Red Cross marked on it.
Oh God, I can't stand it.
And the Ladies Library Association, they did their part. You've got to remember, this is the first of the total wars in which you had a total mobilization of both civilians and the military. You had, remember a few episodes back, we visited Mark Claff's home.
Yes.
On the corner of Grove and North Main.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And he was the head of the coal board. He was involved in rationing. The Ladies Library Association did their part. They rolled bandages. They worked with Mrs. Thomas Good for the American Red Cross. During the flu epidemic, Mrs. Good learned how to drive so she could help Dr. Granger visit so many sick people in town. But they wrapped bandages, the ladies did, and this was one of the bundles. It was wrapped in paper, which was then soaked in paraffin to waterproof it. And here we see a surgical dressing kit that could be taken into the field and used at a surgical hospital. Perhaps Mary Malley, our own Mary Malley, may have used one of these in treating soldiers in the battlefield.
You may have wrapped it.
She may have been one to use that. And then they had smaller packages, and later on they made these up and stored them in a storage container up in the balcony at Stetson Hall.
Yeah, this is really fantastic stuff. I mean, all I can say is holy mackerel. Open it up, would you please?
Ken, I'd love to, but this is the only one we've got left.
Oh my word. All right, what's this stuff?
This
Can
stuff,
of burn.
Now, this is one of the packages that broke open. We found this in one of those packages. And again, the nature of warfare, men were getting injured, men were getting burned, so they had burn ointment. Again, Randolph's people cared about their people serving far away. They wanted to make sure they had the best care they could get. And so they tried to think of everything that the soldiers would need for their medical care on the Western Front. And so somebody put a tube of Tannerburn in, so if somebody got burned, they would have a means of remedying that ill. And we have bandages, and we have ointment. And
I think that's great. You know, did you see the pharmaceutical company here? Sphinx Pharmaceutical.
Yep, Kendall
Kendall
Square
Square
Station
Station.
in Boston.
Yeah, that's stuff.
Even that's local history in its own.
Yeah, that boggles my mind. That boggles my mind. I want to tell you, that's interesting
You know,
stuff.
we could spend all day talking
Yeah.
about these things. So
Yeah.
you know, there are other things we can talk about
For another time.
for another
maybe.
time,
yeah.
maybe.
And this has been a great day.
Yes, it has.
And your stories are always fantastic.
Well, thank
you
you,
are a
Ken.
very interesting man. Don't you think so, you people sitting at home? Don't you think he is an interesting guy? I mean, anybody can take a little piece of cement, a concrete, and tell a story of for hours and hours and hours. It's fantastic. Henry, thank you.
You're very welcome, Ken.
And we will meet again, of course.
You bet.
All right.
Thanks again.
Well, that's it, folks. Another episode of Beneath the Elms. You know, whenever I'm with Henry Cooke and he tells his stories, I get so entranced and so excited that I often forget what we're here for. I become one of you. I become an audience. I become part of the audience. He's that good, and he's that knowledgeable. And I can't thank him enough. And I can't thank you enough for inviting us into your homes and your hearts. We're going to be back. We're going to have another show for you. Until then, I'm Ken Simmons for RCTV. I'll talk to you later.